So, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to talk about beginners and teaching beginners. And we're excited to have this webinar as we're releasing our beginner curriculum from the step-by-step curriculum. So, we're really excited to bring that to you. So, one of the things that I'm really excited about this webinar is because a lot of times we do webinars here at our class, but the webinars we do are often for people who maybe don't know about off to class or they're learning about off to class. So I'm really excited to do a webinar specifically for you who are the users of off to class. So if you were here, if you're watching this, we invited you to this webinar because you are a user. So this is not about oh, this is off to class and this is what you can do with it. We understand that the people here are already familiar with the product. And this is really to empower you to help you get the most out of off to class. So we are really going to start trying to do more of this moving forward. And so we're really excited to have the opportunity to do this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and share my computer screen so that you can see my slides. So your presenters today are going to be myself. Because you guys are off to class, you probably know who I am. I'm the one who writes, the emails to you, and you probably are familiar with me through training videos and things like that. And I'm also here with James, and James is our head of content. James is going to be the one who's going to take you through the actual tips for teaching beginners. So James is going to be the one who kind of takes it from here, and I'm really excited to have him. And at this time, I'm going to have James turn on his camera and microphone.
Okay, I'm hoping that you can, great, you can hear me. Excellent. All right, well, I won't do much on the introduction apart from I'm James and I look after the content or head of the content team. And I'm also a co-founder of the product. So I'm looking forward today just to really give you some advice and hopefully some help around teaching beginner students, which are a great group to teach, but they can also be one of the more challenging ones. So in today's webinar about how to teach beginners, we'll go through three major areas. One is, first of all, is how to approach them, especially if you don't have any experience with them. The second area I'll look at is particular activities for beginners. And then thirdly, teaching strategies for beginners. So there'll be about 8 points that we're going to cover. And the first one will be, how do you approach beginner students? So I'm also going to be looking at focusing. I'll give you information about whether you're teaching a single beginner student, or also if you're in a group if you are teaching groups of A1 students. And one of the things that probably one of the most important things for you to understand as a teacher is that when you get A1 students, this is a very mixed group, and they often contain, if you're teaching a group of A1 students, there is often a hidden difference in levels that you won't, as the teacher, necessarily come to understand until maybe it'll take 10 minutes or maybe it'll take 2 lessons into teaching the class. One of the most important things to remember is that students, there are very few true beginners left in the world today. With the internet and just people who choose to learn English have often had some exposure at some point in their life to the language. And they may know just a few simple greetings or salutations, or they may, in fact, have had some English course experience previously and have come back, months or perhaps even years later, but are still sitting at that A1 level. And what that means is you often have, when you start with a group, you will have students who have had some experience. They will often have a lot of fossilized errors or things that they've hit a wall, and they really need your assistance to move on. But what that means is it can be challenging as the teacher to find the correct starting point. And I'll go into the idea of maintaining flexibility. Just remember that A1 really is the catch-all group for everybody who wants to learn English and has a very low level. And that means that you're dealing, remember, with very different types of learners who may or may not have a lot of experience even in the language classroom before, and you have a lot of different motivations. It's a lot easier, I feel, to teach at higher levels, B2, C1, where people's motivation is very clear or their goal is very clear to kind of getting to native speaker proficiency. At A1, you have everybody, if you like, who's just wanting to give it a go. So be aware as a teacher, some people are probably going to drop out. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure as a teacher. It means that there are lots of things going on with A1 learners. Some people have just decided, hey, it's time to give it a go. Some people have been told by their parents, or children have been told by their parents, or employers have instructed their employees that they need English to move on in their career. So there are lots of different motivations for learning, and you will find that there is, of course, naturally a higher dropout rate. It doesn't mean you're a bad teacher. Okay, Chris, I'll ask you to go to the next slide. So one of the things that I really recommend, and this is just good teaching practice, is because students don't have a lot of language when they start, one of the most important things that you can do is encourage them to interact from the very first lesson, especially if you were teaching online one-to-one. But you need to remember that it can be exhausting for a student who has no language to have to answer every exercise that you do. But if you're in a group, make sure that people are interacting equally in the group, because it's very usual in learning situations for the more confident or the more experienced students to get involved. So be very aware that to maintain a good learning balance for all students, bring the wallflowers to the front of the room. And if you are teaching, for example, or projecting off the class curriculum or whatever content you're using on the board, don't be afraid to move people around. And you can get into really good habits so that you don't, in an A1 class, find that when students enter the classroom every day, they always naturally go to sit in the same chair. And what you will find is the strong learners, of course, come to the front of the classroom because they're ready to go. And very quickly, those who sit toward the back will be the ones who drop out. Okay, it's a generalization, but I think it's a valid one. So be aware, get people involved, get them interacting. And when you do activities, I'll talk more about this as well, try to get them to work with each other. Okay, that's a really important thing, is that students learn to work with other students in the classroom and that they don't form fixed pairs or a person with whom they always continue to work. Okay, Chris, if you can go on to the next slide, that'd be great. Okay, so now we'll go on to activities for beginners, okay? And the first thing we're going to look at there, Chris, is the importance of role-playing and acting. One of the reasons that I believe that A1 or beginner students are one of the most challenging to teach is that in order to do it, you really need to be one of the more outgoing teachers. It's vital to get into role playing and acting. And remember, because some of these students will have next to no language, you need to act out verbs, because trying to avoid, you should avoid using the student's native language where you can. Sometimes it's inevitable, and I don't think it's a disaster if you do it. Some students really like it in different cultures, but it's really important to get people role playing and acting, because this is a very, very strong skill to impart memories in students with language. So role playing and acting, I think, and that's not just between you and the student. Again, mix the students up, get them to do things between themselves. It's a very strong way, and you'll find in some cultures they absolutely love doing this. I know it's not the case. I know it's not the case in all cultures, but I do believe that as the teacher, you want to be encouraging the role playing and acting as much as possible. Okay, Chris, you can go to the next one. This is a really simple thing, but it's a really important one. Again, because students don't have a lot of language, it's very easy to make very strong connections with them by using whatever you have on hand in the room. And this really helps with the role playing and acting. And especially because at this stage, you can, if you want, introduce a lot of vocabulary. Some teachers are reticent to give a lot of vocabulary to students, and I don't believe that lists of vocabulary are particularly helpful, of course, unless they're in a group of related words. But what you should be able to do is use the items that you have around you, and that students often, they'll have their bag of things. Everyone's always got a smartphone on them these days. Every object in the classroom, you should be using all of that stuff, because again, kinesthetic learners in particular, it's the best way for them to use vocabulary is to use the realia, or the physical items that you just have around the classroom. Okay, Chris, I'll get you to go on to the next one if that's okay. Okay, one of the most important things, okay, with speaking, listening, reading, and writing obviously will need to take a little bit of a backseat for A1 learners. It's not really necessary to bring it in the first 3, 4, or 5 lessons, but then it is also very important to start teaching the things like capital letters, and those finer points of punctuation. Get the comma, get the period or full stop or whatever you call it in early, and stick with it. Speaking will come. That's the one that students are naturally motivated to do. That's what everybody wants to do. They want to speak before they do anything else. And reading is just part of having content. There are going to be instructions, but listening is one of the most vital things to give to students, especially graded listening activities. One of the problems, perhaps, or one of the challenges of the internet is there is just so much authentic language available. But because it's authentic native speaker, it includes slang, it includes fast connected speech, and a lot of it is just simply incomprehensible. And I would really advise against encouraging A1 students just simply to listen to stuff that they find on the, that's on the internet. A lot of it they just simply can't understand. So graded listening activities we've put into the curriculum, and this hopefully is the only point at which I'll mention our curriculum on the site. But just to give you a statistic, we have at the moment, from beginner to intermediate, about 270 listening activities, and over half of those are just in the A1 section, because listening is vital. Another thing that students do like to do, but it has fallen out of fashion with teaching within ESL teaching, is drilling and modeling. There's nothing wrong with repeating short phrases. We know now that students learn generally chunks in lexical chunks rather than particular single words. So it's a great idea to give them sentences and help them with their pronunciation. There's this whole obsession now around what is poorly termed pronunciation correction in the ESL world. But something that you can do to boost students' confidence from the very beginning is don't be embarrassed to model and drill. Adults probably are more reluctant to do this because they might perceive it as a childish exercise. But I believe that it's a very strong thing for students to be able to memorize in the same way that native speakers will memorize a phone number in chunks of 3 or 4 numerals. Students can remember actually quite long sentences, and this does boost their confidence. It also allows you to give them some naturalness so that we move away from this, what I call the fine, thanks, and you problems that arise very early and that stay because teachers don't give students natural intonation, and we're the best people to do that. So along with graded listening activities, you can allow students to listen as many times as they like, and you will find that A1 listeners love listening again and again until they get all of the words. One last mention about the curriculum is we do provide all of the transcriptions, but make students work their ears. Don't give them the transcriptions, because once you're reading and listening, it's kind of a cheating activity. What you want to do is teach students how to learn, which again is a task all on its own. Okay, Chris, if you can go to the next one for me. So we'll now look at teaching some strategies for beginners. And this is one thing that I think is really important, is that when you introduce different tasks and activities for the first time, take note of the kind of instructions that you are giving. when you give instructions to A1 students, just order them to do it. Use the imperative. Do this, number one, speak, quiet. It's okay to use that vocabulary, because if you start becoming the over polite native English speaker, would you mind answering the question, they won't get it. So keep your instructions super short, but more importantly, every time you introduce a new type of activity, ensure that all of the participants in the room understand what's going on. So if you do a gap fill, make sure that they understand and get the value of the gap fill, so that next time you do a gap fill, you can reduce your teacher talk and the students already know what to do. One of the problems that you will have with A1, especially if you're teaching a group with a mixed level, is that some students will go at a faster pace because they will have seen a gap fill or a matching activity previously. Some won't. It's really important to make sure that everybody understands how, what the strategy is for doing a task. In the same way that if you teach higher level IELTS or TOEFL students, there are strategies for each question type. You need to get those sorted for the students, or the students need to understand those right from the beginning. Okay, so instructions, short, keep them really brief, and don't be embarrassed just to give orders, because essentially they are the words. Listen, stop. That stuff is super effective in the beginner classroom. Okay, so each time you introduce an activity, just make sure that students get it, and then you would get to reduce the teacher talk later. Homework is vital, and I still think, I know everyone's moving to autocorrection and teachers no longer want to be involved, but one of the best ways of retaining and motivating a beginner student is to get that classroom homework loop established as fast as possible. When you do that, homework is a really empowering way for students, because it's empowering thing. Sorry, let me start again. Homework is a very empowering thing for students because it allows students to show the teacher what they've learned, especially perhaps some of the quieter students, or if you like, the non-active students in the classroom. It gives them a way of being able to show the teacher what they've done. And when the teacher validates that by providing some comments, it's extremely motivating for students. Now, I know today that a lot of teachers are overworked, and that they feel that homework is almost like a necessary evil. But even if we call it just a post-lesson activity, these kinds of things are really essential, especially for students, as I said, perhaps who are sitting more towards the back of the class, or who are quieter during the role play activities. Homework is a really good loop. It makes students feel very confident. And in fact, if you're teaching online, it's an excellent way, probably the best way, to retain students. Another statistic that we know is that of the people who use our content online, I can't say for the A1 curriculum because it's too new, but of 83% of assignments that are given to students online are completed. I think that's an incredible completion rate, and it's a really good way for you. You don't have to spend a lot of time marking students' homework, but just start it from the very beginning, because again, it sets some really good habits into practice. Okay, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this has got to be the last one, all right? So, of course, this really ties back to the very beginning of it, where I said you're going to have often A1 students who start off with a little bit, and then some who have got, it seems like they know a few phrases. But what you're going to find in the A1 classroom is students will hit a wall very fast. It's really important, especially again when you're teaching groups, is that you are very attuned to where the students are going. And what will happen is that students will, okay, you can get past the good morning, how are you, fine, thanks, and you, very, very quickly, because everybody retains that in no matter what language course they've ever been in. But then when it comes to, responding with a negative response, isn't. Everybody knows how to do the positive with the verb be, but as soon as you introduce the contracted form, of the negative verb be, people start messing up, I should say. So be very conscious of where everybody is in the classroom, because what you will find is no matter what the materials are that you use, you're going to find that some students, you're going to come to that 80-20 rule, and it's really hard. You've got to make a decision. Which pace do you go at? Because, of course, you don't want to let some students drop off, but there is a natural attrition rate in A1 because you need to choose a pace in a group which is not going to let the really fast learners get bored, and the slowest ones, you don't want to lose them. So be willing to understand, be willing to change and to be super flexible with the A1 classroom. You might have to miss an entire lesson. You don't have to do every exercise, for example, that's in a textbook or in our curriculum. In fact, one of the things that we've done is we've probably put in more exercises, but the idea is that some people love to do exercises, and you can start as a teacher to understand that you can concept check very quickly students' understanding, and you might only want to do 2 out of 12 exercises if you feel that the class or the student knows what's going on. Don't allow them to get bored. Keep them a little bit challenged and move on. You can always come back if you find that some students haven't understood. And that's really all I wanted to talk about. There's obviously a lot that you could say regarding A1. I'm sure there are books on it, but I'll let Chris take over now.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to ask, if anybody has any questions that they wanted to bring up. So the first question that I wanted to share was from Pedro, and he asked just a minute ago, what do you think about asking students to correct homework together? And if there's something fishy in the answers, they ask the teacher. So
Absolutely, and I think in homework can be different in different cultures and how teachers will approach that. I think it's absolutely great for students to correct each other's homework before the teacher does it at all. But of course, you need to be very sensitive about some students don't like to get things wrong. So the most important thing, and I agree with Pedro, is get students to check it, and then if something is fishy, it should be for the teacher to look at that. But just make sure that all students are feeling like they're learning from something without picking out anybody's particular mistake in the classroom. But homework is in fact an excellent learning activity.
okay.
I think probably the most important thing for an A1 beginner, if you're teaching one person, is remember that it can be an exhausting experience for the student, no matter how enthusiastic and motivated they are. If it's that student's responsibility to answer every exercise as it comes along, it can become a very tiresome process for the student. So the best way to challenge that, again, as I said, is use listening exercises that provide a lot of relief. It comes back to modeling and drilling, but the student feels that it's not too challenging to do it. And the other thing is keep the lesson as long as it needs to be. And a lot of people say, younger students require perhaps only a 20-minute lesson, and I would agree. But that applies equally for adults. Adults can have very expansive time pressures on them, and they might be squeezing in a lesson between, in their lunch break and things like that. In order to make it effective, keep it to the length that it needs to be. Don't feel that you have to teach a 1 hour or even a 45-minute for a lesson to an A1 student. I think that's probably the best tip I can give for one-to-one beginner students, because again, they just don't have that language, and then that embarrassment ensues when the student feels like they're not participating as they should be. There's a limit to what an A1 learner can learn in any single lesson.
Okay, fantastic. Well, James, thank you so much. I feel like that was really valuable, and thank you to everyone who is watching live, and thank you to everyone who's been watching the recording. We are going to continue to make more resources available when it comes to teaching beginners, both written content on the blog, video content, webinars, and we've got a lot of things coming up that we really want to share and we're excited to share with you. So definitely please keep checking back and keep an eye on your inbox. So thank you all for coming and have a great day.